Well, good afternoon, everyone. Oh, good morning, everyone. I thought, how was I going to open up my 20-minute slot here and talk about sustainability in the construction sector? I was just reading the blurb in the front of the brochure. The opening sentence is very brief. It's clear that sustainability is no longer an optional add-in for business. What I'm going to show you in the next 20 minutes is my experiences, probably over the last 10 years or so. It's UK-centric. It's not necessarily the Irish marketplace, but I'll share with you some of the business issues that we've been facing. So by way of a quick run-through of the agenda, I'll talk a little bit about John Sisk. I can't assume everyone knows that, so I'm not a salesman, so don't worry, I'm going to be brief in that area. What is sustainability? I haven't heard anyone actually talk about it. I haven't seen all the speakers here yet, so I'll just touch upon that. And then the interesting stuff. What are the issues that I've faced over the last 10 years or so working in this sector? Why should we be bothering? It's echoing a little bit about what Michael's talked about in his presentation just there. What are the key issues? What's happening? And what are some of the challenges that we face specifically in the UK construction market? And just share a few thoughts, one slide at the end, and some of the lessons learned. So that's where I'm going to go. So Sisk Group, sustainability in action, 156-year-old business. Many businesses come and go. Times are tough for businesses. The fact that we're still around 156 years later, I think is testament. If that's not sustainability in action, I don't know what is. So fifth generation business, employ a couple of thousand people, family owned, private business. As I say, it's arguably sustainability in action. Oops. And the clicker's stopped working. There we go. Right, a little bit about our heritage. You can't have a construction company go on a stage and not talk about health and safety. So here you go, it's social sustainability in action. This is Liberty Hall. I've not seen it myself personally. It's a well-known Dublin landmark. This is a picture of Sisk constructing this in the early 1960s. My view is this is sustainability in action again. You can see the excellent health and safety facilities that are offered there. I think we've given everyone a timber board to stand upon. The guy in the bottom there, he's the foreman holding on to the railing. He's got safety to mind. And interestingly, his son now works for the company. I don't know about any of the offspring, whether there is any offspring from any of the other guys in that photo, but that's sustainability in action about 50 or 60 years ago. What we do, I'm not going to dwell on this, residential, commercial, retail, industrial, pharma, process, healthcare, hotels, leisure, civils, infrastructure, and general construction. So that's the sales pitch over. Right, into sustainability. Sorry, one more slide. Of course, there's this place. Enough said. Good stadium, well built. I don't know if anyone else has put a slide up here talking about defining sustainability. The reason I've put it up here is because so many businesses grapple with what the heck the word means. Really, what does it mean? You go and speak to someone about sustainability. I don't mean this in a facetious way about the carbon. What's a ton of carbon mean? People struggle with some of the concepts around the issue, and what you've got to do is really break it down into simple, bite-sized pieces that simple business people can understand. So you've got a whole raft of different definitions on there. There is one from Ireland, a framework for sustainable development from Ireland. It's in a publication, A Sustainable Future, from 2012. 3 words in there that, and the bottom line is environment, economic and social. It's classic stuff. It's from Brundtland back in 1987. It's been around a little bit. Here we are quite a few years later and people still scratch their heads about what is sustainability. There's one of the challenges for businesses. So, many definitions. Right, what I'd like to do is now just sort of talk you through some of the issues that I've been presented with as a business. I prefer to use the word responsible business rather than sustainability. I think it's easier to understand. It gets quite global in some respects of what we should be doing. Ageing workforce, 50% of the UK will be over 65 by 2050. What's the response of business to that when you've got an older workforce, when you're contributing to pensions, when you might have to think about health issues of that workforce? I don't have the answers here today. I'm just presenting some of the challenges that we've had. Probably more importantly, or more challenging for the construction industry, because this is a business risk for us, is youth unemployment. People don't want to work in engineering anymore. It's not seen as a good job to come into that. So what is our response as a construction company to encourage youth unemployment or deal with youth unemployment and talent management? How do we attract people into the sector and come and work for us? There was a survey published just last year, and this is a real business risk for us. It's by Zurich. And they said 1 in 10 businesses are now tempering their aspirations and their work because they can't get people to come and work for them. So for the construction sector, where we're hopefully seeing an upturn in the environment, in the workload, this is a real challenge. How do we deal with it? We're talking business risk here. It's no longer fluffy, dare I say, sustainability. It's we need people to help us deliver what we're doing. Biodiversity, challenge for construction. Don't build on that greenfield site. There'll be a newt. If anyone works in the UK, there's always a newt on the site, protected species, fencing, you know the score. I don't need to explain any further than that. Fairness, respect and inclusion. It's one of the solutions to a certain extent. Typically, women don't join the engineering sector. Fairly low levels, so we need to be attractive to a wider population of people as possible. They are our future workforce. Whatever gender, creed, colour, it doesn't matter. If we can expand and be interesting to a wider group of people, then hopefully that will address our skills shortage. How we do that? Well, there's the challenge. Responsible sourcing of materials. Everyone will be familiar with FSC timber. And that we've got to get that right. I don't know if you saw the press yesterday. The UK government is apparently introducing emergency measures for public procurement, that they want to know the sourcing of all the steel going into the major infrastructure projects. They also want to know the carbon footprint of it, where it's been transported from. We've got to have answers to that if we're going to be competitive in the marketplace. I'm back to a business risk. That's going to be tricky. I don't know the answer. Effectiveness of the board. There's a lot of talk about gender balances in the board. Can be a male-dominated arena. I can't remember, there's a Scandinavian country, it's the only one I know of which has actually set a quota for women at a senior management level in a business. There's a lot of talk about the issues, and again, that's the sort of thing that's landed on my desk. What do we do about it, Brian? I don't know. Innovation, we've got to deal with that. Women I've already talked about. Health and well-being. I put the slide up jokingly at the start about health. It is about well-being. 60% of UK men are going to be clinically obese by 2050. What's the impact of that health problem for the workforce? How do you respond as a business? Gets challenging. I've already talked a little bit about sustainable business. What if we don't pay people on time? Then we have all the problems associated with that in the supply chain. So it's got to be fair. And there's a lot of activity in the UK market about that. And the last one is a very recent one in the UK market, is the issue of modern slavery. You might think, well, crikey, what's that got to do with things? There are reports out there suggesting that there is migrant labour in the UK construction market, which is being held to task, paying fees for accommodation, transport, food, and these people are working on our projects. Under the UK legislation, PLCs now have to account for this and understand what the risks are. So really what I wanted to do there was just highlight a range, it's not everything, and I don't have all the answers in that, about some of the issues that we're facing in the construction sector and the challenges that we have to respond to. So why? Why do we have to do this? Well, there is a bigger picture around this. I'm not going to dwell on the carbon agenda, but climate change. It's there. We get asked a lot about mitigation, adaptation. We get challenged to measure the carbon footprint of all our projects. When you've got a multi-million-pound project with hundreds of deliveries going into it, and the client wants to know your delivery mileage, you think about how you actually start collecting that information and that data, it gets really quite tricky. Also, arguably cumbersome. And my challenge back is, what do we do with that information when we've got it? Do we influence change? Not always. Sometimes it almost feels like collecting the data, but as Michael said, we've got to get the baseline there to understand what we can possibly do in the future. Resource availability, it becomes an issue. Regulation is a real driver in the UK market responding to things. It only ever gets tighter, doesn't it? You never hear of regulations going away. You still have to deal with it. Population growth. If any of you have driven on the UK motorway network recently, like I have, I live 20 miles away from my office. Admittedly, it was a little foggy the other morning. It took me an hour and 10 minutes to do that 20 miles journey. That's on the UK's major infrastructure roadworks, and it's been pretty gnarly getting here this morning with the amount of traffic today. In the UK, the population is going to go from 64 million to 73 by 2015. That's a 14% uplift. In Ireland, it's going to go from around 4.5 million up to 6 million. So you're going to have another 1 million people or so here in Ireland. Is that not an opportunity for construction? These people have got to live where they live. They've got to travel. We've got to have the infrastructure that actually services their needs. So in some respects, it's not all doom and gloom. There is an opportunity there, but equally we need to scratch our heads and think what we're doing about it. Technology. For those of you working in construction centre, you will have heard the three-letter acronym BIM. It's meant to be the saviour. The UK government set a target of going for BIM level 2, which is meant to make construction more efficient. I go back to 1984. I did my O-level computer studies back then. It was one of the first ever O-level computer studies that was available. I had a little Sinclair ZX Spectrum with 1K of memory. I've now got a smartphone in my pocket where I have the world at my fingertips. That's 30 years. So that's what technology has done in terms of development. And disruptive change. It's stuff that we don't anticipate that's going to come and bite us. We've got to actually start thinking about this. Now, why have I put all these things up? I'm going to use exactly the same words as Michael's just used in his presentation. We've got to anticipate the future as a business if we need to survive. More broadly, quite simply, let's get hard-nosed and business-orientated about this. It's our license to operate. It's about reputation. I'm going to put a logo up here which you're going to recognise, and I won't have to say any words. If you get it wrong, you'll end up like these guys do. Was it? And I don't need to say any more than that. We all face these issues as large organisations. So, talked a lot about the global perspective. I've talked about some of the broader issues. What's happened in the UK construction market? What's the sector response been? In the bottom left-hand side there, you've got EPA 90. That's the Environmental Protection Act 1990. So that's been around 25 years, which began to introduce some of the requirements. There is older legislation. There's legislation in case law, which has been around hundreds of years, in fact. But really, for me, things started changing back in 1990, 1991, when we all started scratching our heads and thinking about green and environment. You then have some major projects starting in the late noughties, 2006, 7, 8, with the ODA, the Olympic Delivery Authority in London 2012. They actually set some quite demanding targets. They focused on energy, waste, water materials, biodiversity, and environmental impact. The challenge they presented the construction industry with, well, let's say there was a lot of head scratching. They didn't get it all right. They didn't get all the answers that they wanted. However, they presented the challenge and the industry rose to it. Roughly at the same time, you had Crossrail starting in London. They took the next step from the ODA, in my opinion, in certain areas. Again, some things didn't work and others did. They set the bar a little bit higher. And now we have High Speed 2, just as one of the major infrastructure projects across the UK. Again, the bar is being shifted upwards. So really the point I'm going to make here is in a space of less than 10 years, the bar for sustainability is getting increasingly hard to address. And as a business, we've got to respond to this and answer it. I just go back to 2008 when I came back into the construction sector. I've worked in a number of different industries. Back then we used to get tenders which said, have you got an environmental policy? Yeah, tick the box, 14,001, we're on the list, off we go. Now, well, the questions that you get are really quite demanding. One of the trickier ones is about corruption indices and where our supply chain is based. And first and foremost, you reach for Google and wonder what on earth the question's on about because you don't know the answer. That's the sort of thing we're having to respond to now. So there's been a real movement from environment and green into very much broader responsible issues in terms of sustainability. So 3 slides. What's it mean in practice? Well, I'm going to use the social, environmental and economic model. You're probably scratching your heads and thinking, why has he put a picture of some money up underneath local economic growth? Well, the issue that we get challenged with, certainly on the major infrastructure projects, is all to do with employment and employability and ultimately the local economic impact that our projects have. I'm going to read from my list here. We're challenged to deliver some of the following. Our clients want numbers behind these. How many 14 to 17-year-old work placements have you offered? How many 18 to 24-year-old unemployed work placements have you offered? How many school curriculum support events have you done? How many graduates are you employing? How many new apprentices are you taking on? How many have you got in the pipeline and how many are completing as well? Are you advertising jobs locally? How many people are you employing locally? Suddenly, you've got to start scratching your head and think, crikey, we've got to be providing training to all these people and also evidencing it. And that's the crucial part of it. It's the evidencing this, collecting the numbers associated with it. Back to the point of why is that local economic growth? Well, if you're employing local people, they're quite simply spending their wages in the area where they live, leading to the sort of the economic growth of the area. Arguably, and I use this phrase, and no one's really challenged me on it, are we as civil and building engineers becoming social engineers? I'll leave that one open. One you're probably more familiar with, subject of greenhouse gases, the environment. The carbon agenda for us has been really regulatory driven. If you go back in time, there's the EU emissions trading scheme, there's a carbon reduction commitment, or CRC as it's now known. More recently in the UK, we've got ESOS, the Energy Saving Opportunities Scheme, which brings it down the responsibilities of actually us understanding our energy footprint and where we go. It's challenging for us. We've got to account for what we're doing. We've got to measure and monitor, and then we've got to take those informed decisions. And Michael, again, has stolen my thunder in terms of some of the terminology. It's great that one organisation is echoing another. I've used the example of tracking delivery miles in there. My purely personal point of view, I think, is I've seen enough measuring and monitoring in the industry. What we need to be thinking about is mitigating and reducing now. I think we've got the baseline. We've got a handle on what we're doing. The business aspect of that is the cost. We pay for energy. It's as simple as that. If we want to add to the operational efficiencies of our businesses, we cut the costs. You don't necessarily cut the costs, you cut the energy consumption, and the indirect benefit is a carbon reduction. So last topic area I want to just briefly cover is the economic piece. Return on investment, and I want to give you a subtly different slant here. What you've got on the screen there are a couple of reports which have been recently published, both towards the end of last year. On the left-hand side, you've got a report by the World Green Building Council. In essence, it's a study about health, well-being and productivity in offices. All too often, we focus on the capital cost of the buildings that we're building. It's a short-term view. The biggest asset that any of us have got in a building is the people in there. And if you start thinking about why those people are inside that building, it's to be productive employees, adding value to the shareholders, all the rest of it. So the goal should actually be thinking about how can we make these places better for people to work in. And this is where the challenge comes in terms of the short-term versus long-term view. We need to be thinking about the health, the well-being and productivity in the offices. It's sort of a bit cutting-edge stuff, this. Again, we don't quite have all the answers around it, but it's where the industry is beginning to go. The other report that I've got up there is Delivering Sustainable Buildings. It was a report by Sweet and BRE, and they actually looked at the BREEAM standard, which is basically an environmental standard. You build structures to this standard and you get a different ranking. People said, well, what's the point in building to these higher standards? Well, this report actually sets out some of the costs and some of the benefits associated with it. To achieve the higher standard buildings, they're saying it typically adds 1 or 2% to the capital cost of the building. Now, the return on investment in that is that actually you'll get your money back in 3, 4, 5 years through simple utility savings. The spin-off for some of the people who are building and financing these structures is actually those buildings tend to turn out to be more attractive places to live and work, and now you can charge a higher rental. So sustainability and environment does actually offer a return on investment if you start looking at it in the right context. So last couple of points, last couple of slides I'd like to run through. What are the key experiences I've come away from in the last sort of 10 years in the construction industry? I think we are taking small, steady, but positive steps. We don't have all the answers. We're grappling with new and ever-emerging issues. It's fluid. It's dynamic. There's going to be something popping out the woodwork, just like yesterday with the UK government challenge on where's your steel coming from and what's its carbon footprint. The bar I've seen through these different projects we've been involved in is being raised. If it's not by us, it'll be by others, and we've got to match that. The journey, and again, Michael's used the word, it's the future. It's not measured in months or even single-digit years. Our aspirations have to be in multiples of 5 and 10 years, and that's where we have to set our vision. Realising the benefits is challenging, and those 2 reports I just had up there, they're only from last year, and they're the first of an early bunch of reports that are really setting out the hard economic realities of it's worthwhile delivering on sustainability. And I suppose the last point I want to put up there is prepare to change. The world is moving on. We can't stand still. We've got to respond to these things, whether we like it or operate. And I'll take you back to one of those earlier slides. It's our license to operate. We get challenged now by all our customers. Give us evidence that you're dealing with all these things. We want hard facts and numbers. We can't now write we will or we shall. We have to write we have, and here's the evidence. The last little bit one then, last slide from me, sustainability for CISC. We have our vision. We have our model. We're looking to deal with environment, social and economic issues. We want to have a beneficial impact to the environment. We have to have a positive social impact, and we want to balance economic viability and consideration and social issues. Thank you very much.